you very much for organizing the stage for us and setting it all up so nicely for us. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion. I'm delighted to have such a high-profile panel next to me, so thank you for coming and joining the discussion. My name is Hubert Ertl. I'm Vice President and Director of Research at the Federal Institute of Vocational Education in Bonn. I will tell you a little bit about what the Institute does in just a moment. Before that, I want to introduce the panelists very briefly, because we don't have that much time, really. And I'm also sure that you will talk about your role and also how you came into that role in the context of your input anyway. So I will keep myself very short. I'll start with Karni Wolf, who is CEO and co-founder of a national initiative in Israel called She Codes. That's right. And I'm sure you will tell us a little bit about that. It sounds fascinating. We sent around some questions in preparation for the panelists, and the sort of gender angle to the topic we are talking about was part of that. So I'm sure we'll come to that in our discussion. Next up is Pavel Bilenko, who is, I need to focus here, who is Head of Educational Programs for Industry 4.0 at Moscow School of Management. So thank you for coming and joining us too. And last but not least, there is David, what's your surname again? Langdon. Thank you for joining us. David is a Senior Policy Advisor at the US Department of Commerce. So, as I said, a high-profile panel. We at the Institute are interested in the basic question which is driving a lot of interest here at Republica, but in many other events. And the question is simply, how do we need to train the workforce to be equipped for the challenges of a digital world of work? That's driving the work of the Institute in many different ways. The three main areas that we work on is research in this field. What is the kind of data we need in order to predict changes in the world of work of the future? The second area has to do with regulatory work, with curricula for training occupations. That's one of the important roles of the Institute as well. So all the research findings, ideally, will find their way into training regulations. That's easier said than done, let's put it like that. And the third area also tries to use results from our research, and that has to do with implementing innovation in the practice of vocational education and training in Germany. So these are the three big areas of work at the Institute. I myself are responsible for the research part, and we've got a big research initiative together with the Federal Ministry for Education and Research on digitalization, the future of work. And that initiative focuses on, one part is focusing on big data, basically what do the big data sets tell us about future labor market needs, skills gaps, and so on. And a few colleagues responsible for that part of the work are actually in the audience. Part of that work is dealing with predictions that have been made, which I'm sure most of you will be aware of. Osborne and Fry, for the US context, for example, have predicted that about 50% of work will disappear, of jobs will disappear in the foreseeable future. And our colleagues kind of tested that hypothesis for the German context and come to very different conclusions. So that's an interesting debate that is taking place. Another part of the work is really drilling into the details of specific occupational fields. What does digital change mean in certain occupational areas? And the results are quite surprising, actually, how uneven that impact really is if you look at different occupational fields. And it's not along the predicted lines of, well, high-tech fields will be affected more and more service-oriented jobs will not be affected. It's much more complex than that. And what we also see is companies are making their own decisions about what they pick up in terms of digital possibilities and calculate very carefully, is this really worth it? Do we want to make the investment now, or do we want to wait a bit until the first mistakes are made by other people and then we'll invest, and so on? So very interesting patterns. And the final strand of that digitalization initiative has to do with pedagogy. What does the digital revolution really mean for learning processes in vocational education and training? Are the trainers and the teachers at vocational schools prepared? And you can imagine that the short answer to that question is not really. Certainly not across the board. Again, a very uneven picture. So that's the sort of work we are doing at the Institute, and that's why the topic is so relevant for us, and that's why we are so pleased to have you here to get into a discussion with. And in our invitation, we posed a few questions and also asked you to prepare your starting proposition, if you like, and we'll do that one by one now. And we ask you to do that from your perspective, of course, from your background of work. And I would like to start and go round in the same order as I did the introduction. So, Karni, please start us off.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you for the Institute and the Ministry and the conference. I lead an organization and a community of female software developers. We offer courses all over Israel. We have over 30 branches all over Israel. We offer free courses for women to learn coding. And the courses are not only meant for technical women, but are from all backgrounds. So this is the way we approach the change of digitalization, because we offer the skills for women from all kind of backgrounds. And we also approach if we're talking about jobs that are disappearing, the estimations for jobs in software development is that the gap and the need is growing. And that's how we're also approaching it. We're trying to create more software developers and also to help women that are necessarily in the high-tech industry gain these capabilities and skills in software development. And we have a great need and interest in our activity, and we have 20,000 women only in Israel that attend our activities and learn coding, and we have great success in it. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So, my name is Pavel Bilenko. I represent now Moscow School of Management Skolkovo. Thank you for the invitation and the introduction. I'm alumni of Moscow School of Management Skolkovo, and for the last 2 years I was a general manager of machine building factory in Russia. It was a joint venture international project with Italian companies, so by our own experience we understood and we understand very well for now what is the impact of the new technological systems of the fourth industrial revolution to the society, to the alumni of Skolkovo, to researchers of Skolkovo, to staff of Skolkovo. Together with my colleague, with Ivan, we are doing a lot of research work for now. Trying to trace, trying to spot and understand what's the influence of these trends to the changing specialties and professions and society. And they're really huge, these impacts and these changes. And now we designed and started the program for TVETs, for Russian TVETs, together with foreign colleagues, with German colleagues, with American colleagues. We started from the far east of Russia, from Khabarovsk region. I need to say that one of the major responses, one of the most important responses in our actions is close collaborations with institutions, with business, with alumni of Skolkovo, with schools and universities. So building an ecosystems and consortiums is a very important actions for now. That's why we are in a close collaboration with Aachen University, with Germany institutions, with Silicon Valley companies, and with Hong Kong and China company, with HKUST, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, building educational programs now. So I'm sure that the educational programs, modern educational programs, and tight collaboration, close relationship with the institution is the answer to your questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be on the panel with everybody and to talk about this important topic. The approach from the U.S. government with respect to digitalization, at least as pertains to my department, is often, it sort of starts with the technology and on the need for a public-private collaboration in this space. If we think about automotive vehicles, or particularly autonomous vehicles, our department did some research on the topic recently. Basically to understand, the extent to which technology change leads not necessarily to occupations disappearing, I don't really like to think about it in such drastic terms, but into how the tasks underlying an occupations change, and then how those occupations will evolve, the impact on the workers in those occupations, and what maybe, how, and then the educational needs. The research that some colleagues of mine did on autonomous vehicles suggested that about, I think, 15% of U.S. jobs in some ways require driving as part of what they were doing. And about 1/4 of them, the principal activity was actually driving. And the other 3/4, though, were jobs where driving was very critical to what was going on, but was not the primary task. And autonomous vehicles actually present an opportunity for productivity increases in those and actually potential positive job impacts. And the workforces for these different kinds of jobs are quite different. The traditional truck driver tends to be male, is disproportionately a high school graduate as opposed to a college graduate, and oftentimes maybe picks those kinds of jobs because it's really the best option for them out there, but it's not, it's a difficult job, and it's in some cases there's safety, it's really autonomous vehicles that can be a safer option than driving a truck. But so thinking through about what the job implications for these workers is very critical, and what a truck driver would be in the future. For the other 3/4 of the workers, so it might be like first responders, people in construction trades, home care aides, repair and installation workers, real estate agents. The implications of it, they tend to be higher skilled jobs, and the implications of, and it's a more flexible workforce, and so the implications of actually implementing this technology are very positive. So, anyways.
Okay. Well, thank you for these initial reactions to the topic and to the questions we asked. I wanted to follow up with you, Karni. Israel, of course, is globally renowned for its startup scene. Lots of countries would like to sort of have a bit of that as well, copy maybe some of the strategies that you have. But of course, as far as I know, the startup scene is much older than the discourse about digitalization, and therefore the question that I have is how has how have the digital possibilities that we have nowadays, how is that changing the startup scene in Israel?
I think it causes it to grow even more. We can see the whole approach to many different businesses grow even in a more digital way. If we look at WeWork, which is originally an Israeli working space, it becomes also sort of a startup high-tech approach. So we see many different companies are trying to join the startup scene even without necessarily being the most technological approach, but it does turn out as a technological approach, and we see many. Yeah.
So is it a matter of digital opportunities making it easier to create a startup, but isn't it on the other hand creating sort of competition globally that might not have been there before? Do you feel the effect of digital media, virtual environments creating more pressure on these startups who usually need a bit of time at the beginning where they can develop in their own right without having the pressure from competition? Is there an effect like that as well?
I believe competition is positive. I believe competition and pressure just causes more growth and development. Yes.
Well, of course, that's the textbook answer. So I want to move on to Pavel, because we talked a little bit about developments in Russia before the start of the panel, and you also mentioned in your introduction really that the importance of networks, of ecosystems is really increasing a lot. And I wanted to ask about, are there any specific Russian strategies in fostering that at a time when markets become more global, but also the competition can also lead to policies that are becoming protective of certain industries and so on. So how is Russia dealing with that situation?
It's quite difficult to say about the protection in terms of the growing and exponential development of technologies. Because it's like hurricane, so you can't defend yourself if you're in the eye of hurricane. And I'm just feeling myself like in the center of something really and really important and very transforming everything. But we developing strategies, definitely. We're working with major Russian and foreign institutes, as I said before. We have an agency of strategic researchers in Russia, and together with the Moscow School of Management Skolkovo and the alumni network of Moscow School of Management Skolkovo, we created several researches regarding the, for example, future specialties and future professions. What are they going to be? What are the most important factors in the changes of the professions in the nearest 5-10 years? Maybe it's possible to show some slides, two slides about it. Yes, it was a project of 2015-2017. Ivan is the head of the team from the Moscow School of Management Skolkovo side, interviewed several experts and several teams of experts. We defined approximately more than 100 future professions, and the strategies in terms of next slide, in terms of educational programs with the requirements for these professions and with the competitiveness with these professions. Moreover, it was like a media event and a show event. So this is my son. His name Nikita. And he's a virtual reality architect. So it's a description of the future profession. I have for kids, 2 of them tried to use these technologies, tried to be a future specialist. Therefore, our strategies here in our kids, in the planning of their future, in planning of the responses from the educational institutions, from universities, to the path to the future specialist path. The next research is a research about impact of the skills of the future to the markets, to the policies, and description of the new economic activities. So we define it by these researches. We define the areas to explore, areas to train, the areas around which we designing the new educational programs. That's quite a tactical, maybe, and practical way of thinking and way of doing. But with close collaboration of the institutes and the governments, we're doing this in a strategic way. So the ground, the basement, the foundation in terms of research is very important here, definitely.
Well, you led us to an area we wanted to explore, actually, and that's the area of new professions. What professions do we need in the future? And of course, David also mentioned some examples from the automotive industry and the sectors related to that. David, are there any sort of systematic pieces of work in your area of work that try to sort of predict the professions of the future? The background to that question is actually a very German one, because, as I said, the Institute is doing a lot of work on occupations, the regulations that underpin training in those occupations and so on. So we are asked by society, basically, by politicians, but it goes much beyond that. Well, what are the new occupations? And I think we've got some good answers, but I also think everybody is guessing as well, because the dynamics of digitalization are so rapid at the moment that it's hard to predict. So what's the situation in the US?
So let me share one we learned about the other day, actually about a week or two ago, and it floored me. Sewing machine operator, new occupation. But if my kids, I have 2 girls, and if they went and looked at information that our government puts out, great information on employment projections, it will suggest that occupation is going to decline over the next decade. And yet, in the smart fabrics realm, we hear from industry that they can't find sewing machine operators. And so there's a gap. And there's a perception issue. And then there's a issue of just really understanding what the needs are and building pipelines into that industry or to that field. We have a mechanism for certain important technologies to start doing that. And so we have what we call Manufacturing USA centers. We have 14 of them in the United States. It's a public-private partnership with seed money from the federal government, connections to the Department of Defense in some cases, Department of Energy in others, Department of Commerce in one case. And they look at key technologies and both how to basically develop agile manufacturing, innovation, and transfer, prototyping, but also the workforce aspects of it. And there's one for advanced fabrics, actually connected with MIT, the Advanced Functional Fabrics of America Institute. And one of their jobs is basically to work with industry partners, to identify in a systematic manner what the new jobs are, what the cool ones are, and what old jobs maybe have changed and need to be updated, both in order to develop the pipelines and sort of change the public perception around what may be falsely seen as dying industries.
No, that's very interesting and reminds me again of some discussions we have in Germany. New professions, of course, need new training, and new training needs trainers, teachers that are well prepared. And I alluded to problems we find in the research in terms of preparation of in-company trainers, but also teachers at vet schools. I just wanted to ask you, from your national perspective, what is the situation? Are there initiatives in your country that try to do something about that, to take on that challenge in a systematic way? Because certainly speaking for the German context, there are more than enough little initiatives here and there are some flagship schools, flagship companies who put a lot of effort in it, and that's all fine. That's going in the right direction. But it's very uneven. That doesn't cover the depth and breadth of all the occupations that are out there. So what's your experience with that? Who wants to start?
Yeah. We really impressed by MIT example, by Neil Gershenfeld Fab Academy example. So now MIT is developing year to year the program of the distributed digital manufacturing courses, which has a lot of online activities. You know, one of my favorite phrases for last 20 years was a Gibson phrase, Gibson idea that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So our role here, as I understand, as I see, is to organize this distribution all around areas all around the world. Therefore, by working with Far East Russian TVETs institutions and trainees of these institutions, we just organize by modern telecommunication means. They are amazing, just amazing. We organize these conferences, we organize these transferring of the knowledge all around Russia and all around the world. And this is kind of our very important role here. The second area, so first of all, geographical distribution. The second area is institutional distribution and institutional organization of communications. By means of the Skolkovo Alumni Network, we're using a lot of the founders and managers of the companies, which has certain requirements for the future skills, for the future specialties, for workers and for engineers and so on. And we including them in our educational sessions, in our conferences, in our expert sessions, in the forms again of communication and tailoring, designing at the foresight sessions as well, strategies of development of these trainings of TVETs.
How we see it in our organization and also in Israel in general is using the internet and the whole digitalization in order to change the training. Instead of creating more teachers or training the teachers, we need to realize the students can train themselves. So the students can use the internet and can use the programs, the new programs we are developing, and this is also how we are doing it. We have courses in which students teach themselves through online courses. So this is also actually the biggest skill that the people need to learn, is how to learn themselves. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but who are the people who create these wonderful online courses? We know that that's really difficult to do well. Yeah, I mean, online courses, we've got a lot. Not many are really achieving the aims they have and are engaging enough and are sustainable as well. That's another aspect. So who are the people who create these online courses that really fulfill their role?
I think the academics. But it is a whole skill also to develop courses, and instead of developing frontal training, is to develop these kind of courses.
Yeah, I would say, to go back to the ecosystem point that you raised earlier, I mean, our view is very much that we want to foment ecosystems around certain technologies, and government's not the ecosystem. So, and that's our general view.
Okay. There's another area I wanted to explore, and that's the gender equality aspect, really, of digitalization. In a very black and white, simplistic view, you hear statements like digitalization is really the project of white men, basically. I mean, it's also a kind of ethnicity angle there, and that's a topic, an interesting topic as well. But I wanted to focus on the gender dynamics here. The fact that She Codes has got a very specific target group, I think, is a good opening for exploring this aspect. So, how came the initiative about? What was there in the Israeli context that sort of initiated that particular support mechanism, I guess, the initiative represents? Can you tell us a bit more about the background, please?
So it came upon as a friends gathering and studying together, and it grew to the need that software developers are missing, and there aren't many women who choose this career path. And this is the approach that we're trying to solve, where there's on one hand there's a need for more software developers, and on the other hand, very little women are doing software development, and this is the reason why we're trying to solve it. And we believe that the biggest problem is actually the lack of role models, the perception that it's white male, even though there's no apparent reason for that to happen. So we're trying to solve it by creating more role models and bringing them up front, the upfront stage. Mm-hmm.
I just, last August when I was in Silicon Valley, I was just amazed how many activities of STEM and technical activities do you have for women. So at the morning of the Sunday morning at the San Jose, I spotted a group of women who trained themselves in CNC sewing machines and so on. So a lot of the books about the software for women, and a lot of the, as I saw, assembling kits as well for future engineers. So I think the society has responses for that as well. So it's everything all right here.
Yeah, I think I would echo everything that you guys said. I mean, this is just a specific example of sort of the broader issues of diversifying STEM jobs in general.
Yep.
And, you know, from the educational system to the transition into work to continuing throughout careers, there's a atrophy of women and minorities in STEM in the United States. Part of it's the characteristics of the job, so it's really cool to introduce people, to example, to coding, which has, you know, creates a lot of flexibilities that, you know, can maybe make those jobs more attractive than people are aware of.
Okay. Well, linked to what we just talked about is, of course, also the socioeconomic class issue. Class would be the term used in the UK where I worked before. So I want to use that. And the discussion over there was certainly, are we disenfranchising disadvantaged groups of the society even more in a situation where digitalization depends, at least to some extent, on infrastructure, on gadgets that people can afford or can not afford. And certainly, again, lots of initiatives out there to counteract that. Some of them are not very effective, I would say. Some of them are showing the desired results. So what, in your country perspective, what are the main strategies to make sure that digitalization, the advantages of it, are there for everybody to tap into, who is willing to make an effort, basically, rather than disenfranchising parts of society even more than they are already?
Based on Russian perspective, the base strategy here is to make it open and free to everyone. Could you show, start some slides? I will show it. Or maybe you can show some slides here about it. So we have some facilities. We have some possibilities to do it open and to do it free for everyone. For example, this is my region where I live. It's Kaluga region, not far from Moscow. Next slide, please. And I can show. And yeah, it has an open Fab Lab inside. We organized the Fab Lab ourselves with my friends. It's named Fabinka, Fab Lab in Kaluga. And this is our history of first 2 years, from 2014 till 2016. And you see here a lot of people from various threads, various society groups, which is just enjoying the possibilities of the digital manufacturing and new industrial trends. It's 3DP, 3D scanning, whatever else, big data, robots, and so on. So it's fun. We just enjoying of it, and we just showing that it's really fun. It's really interesting to dive deep to these new technologies, to organize these open courses and open events. This is recent photos. So Kaluga, as a city in the heart of Russia, has its own open, new and modern cultural center. We're making it digital with our friends. Show this next few photos, yes, and next photo. And these are people at the Saturday morning which are doing the 3D printing by themselves. This is an open workshop for everyone, and it's not a step-by-step instructional workshop. So we're not training them, we're not explaining them how do they going to achieve their goal. We're just showing the possibilities that everyone could do something, could do everything from nothing, from bits, and they doing. In 1 hour, they're doing it by themselves, by enjoying this process. So I'm sure that our own experience, our own practices, everyone for now can start its own Fab Lab because it's very cheap. It was my own investments, and it's almost nothing. Therefore, I'm thinking now more and more that proactive approaches is very important in the digital economy to distribute it more evenly. Thank you.
David, do you want to?
I think that's fantastic. So, I mean, certainly we have, like our Manufacturing USA centers I cited earlier do similar sort of open doors efforts. I mean, the one I could think of specifically is in Chicago, which deals with digital manufacturing and works with the city hall basically to help bring in groups of children through the doors, the exposure, and the sort of the thinking that they can actually participate in this, and it's cool. As a result, I think they brought in close to 200,000 students through the 14 different centers in the last year. So, I mean, little by little, you're planting a lot of seeds that make a difference. I think actually going back to the workforce discussion earlier, that matters as well. I mean, one of the barriers to entry is the misperception that a lot of these jobs will require a 4-year college education, which particularly in the U.S. it's a huge investment. And that's a perception. You need a perception change both from the companies that are hiring workers and on the workers' side about what specific training requirements are needed. Is it an apprenticeship maybe with a community college degree as opposed to a 4-year degree? And then what are the possibilities after that? So,
it's time to open up to the floor to see what questions are out there. So please, your questions, comments on the discussions we've had so far. Is there anything you want to raise? Yeah.
I have a question to a colleague from Israel again. You told that these digital courses, they should be done by academics. But is it the whole answer? So do these academics, do they by themselves have a special skills to prepare these digital courses? Because like to be on the stage and speak to people personally is completely different than to design a good digital course that will be utilized by people from their screen. So it's completely different experience, it's completely different approach to creating interfaces and so on. So how you actually deal with that challenge? So do you just have this, I don't know, so many people on the market then who you can hire and make these digital courses, or it requires some special force to foster that? Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. What I meant by academics is not academics who are trained in teaching, but academics who can create courses and change them according to what's going on in response. By creating a course, seeing how it goes, doing a pilot, fixing it up, hearing responses, using basically, again, the advantage of digitalization by spreading it out and seeing the many response of different students of how well the course works, and then replicating it to other courses and in other fields as well. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I can come into that, the problem that we have is that academics who sort of are used to teaching in front of a class and so on, for them to create online courses, that step is quite big. And I think what you said echoes that as well. But additionally, we also got the problem that those academics are often not that confident with the digital opportunities out there, and they also have the perception that all their potential students are much further ahead, so that creates inhibition and so on. And I've seen academic colleagues actually going in the other direction because of that and saying, no, what I have to offer, my wisdom, you get in a different, and in most cases that means in a very traditional way. So persuading them to make that step change is actually quite hard. And from my point of view, I think it's a problem that we probably solve by another generation of academics who were educated themselves in a different way. But that might be too optimistic. I don't know what your view is.
If we were talking about new professions, then this could be a new profession, creating online courses.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that fast prototyping and the critical amount of places and spaces for fast prototyping is important here as well. So we work with some of the researchers in Russia and in Germany, which has their own companies' prototyping areas to adapt this practice, to adapt this research to real practical world, to check this out quite quickly. And it's again a question of the collaboration, question of partnership of academics and companies, and doing the research together in these prototyping spaces. It's very important now.
I mean, I think we talk in all different fields around how jobs evolve over time, and there's a need for retraining. And so, I mean, there's maybe a little bit of irony that, in the teaching profession also, that there would need retraining, right? That digital competencies would become a basic part of the credentials you would need to become a teacher.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
So when it comes to those new professions, to those new jobs, are there any particular plans to make them equally accessible for people to become a professional in that job? For instance, I imagine that a lot of those new jobs have an internet connection as a requirement. So are there also then, again, plans of co-working spaces that would then lead to maybe your own office or startup that are evenly spread out, or also some subsidization of connecting your home with the overall net? So.
Thank you.
So we as a Skolkovo, as a part of the Skolkovo ecosystems, has its own several own makerspaces inside. It's not such open as a tech shop ecosystems, for example, in USA. It was much opened. It worked as I saw by my own experience. I took participants in some courses in the tech shop. It was opened from 10 to midnight, and everyone could use the facility. I'm sure that it's kind of the requirement for a modern company to have its own maker space or its own prototyping space, which is open to employees. I like the idea of the Dale Doherty, who is quoting by some Japanese companies who is not innovative enough since 80s of last century. He is just underlining that individuals, that workers of these companies is inventing something outside the working hours during evening time in their own hobby time. So yes, it's real challenge for the companies to adopt these practices, to be fast and flexible as Japanese and Chinese companies, and to develop these spaces. From the employees' point of view, it's a question to the company. Do we have such an area? Do we have such an ecosystem and such an atmosphere? If not, it's time to establish it and start to develop it definitely.
No? Okay. There was one question here before.
Yes, thanks. I was wondering, I want to touch on something that Pavel said before, because right now we have all these different views from Israel, from Russia, and from the USA. And you already mentioned, Pavel, that you have corporations. And I was wondering, is it very easy to open your national ideas to a more global perspective? I mean, Israeli she codes, could that be moved to a different country easily? What about the US soy machine problems in rural Russia? I think the problems might be rather similar. And what are you doing to show approaches that go beyond national perspectives?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a very good question, I need to say. Since we are fully private enterprise, since we are fully private company, as a school of management, we have no such limitations, and we are open to communicate with every part and every country of the world. And I think that one of the first arguments and one of the first facts is entrepreneurial spirit of the event or of the venue to be open and to build such bridges and such ecosystems all around the world. It's a bit the same with the Chinese institutions. So they have a time for prototyping of the cooperations or ideas or projects. After 1 or 2 years of these ecosystems prototyping, governmental rules and governmental actions taking place usually. So it's definitely, we definitely, as entrepreneurs, we definitely need the time and need the space to build these bridges and to build these cooperations. In terms of the private venues, it's possible.
Yeah, I just would like to comment to the question before about the accessibility of these new skills for all the people around the world, and especially for the underprivileged. Actually, we did the research on this topic, and actually there are two answers. One is optimistic, one is pessimistic. Optimistic is that actually technologies by themselves, they make them accessible. For example, if you take this device, in 1980, all the functions that are now in our mobile phones, if you want to get them together in one room, you have to spend $1 million. So now it's 200. So the price is drastically lower than 30 years ago for the same functions. And if you, for example, there is a case of India when Facebook wanted to make internet accessible for whole the country, but then the Indian government told that, okay, no, we don't want this. Because actually, why? Probably because they don't want to lose the power on their own society. So, and that's the question of sharing power between corporations who make this technologies accessible and current political systems. How far they would like to agree for that. And pessimistic answer is that in theory it's not there is no confirmation for that, but the digital gap is really growing, and that, for example, somewhere in Silicon Valley we will get this completely digital nation, and it will be developed on such high level, and they will have so much resources that all other people will just not possible to reach them anymore, and there will be and so the world will be divided in these two nations, digital and not digital. But who knows, actually, we will see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One more sentence. Another major issue is state guys beginning to understand that it's not possible to create a competitive product or service without the cooperation for now. So after each successful service or product now, consortium which created it. In terms of Porsche, with this beautiful car inside the forum, after the iPhone, after everything from now is several companies and several governments and several states. So if you want to be competitive now, you have to collaborate, you have to cooperate. It's clear for even specialists who create a low ecosystem inside the states for now as well. Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's certainly one way of seeing it, but you could, I mean, if we look at the other sort of end of the spectrum, if you like, we talked about global networks, global collaboration, and the wonderful products and services that can produce. What about the other end of the spectrum? What about the small companies, the startups that are in non-tech fields? I mean, there's certainly some evidence from the research we do at the Institute that these sorts of small companies, they are relying on the early adopters, which tend to be, in the German context, the bigger companies who've got the resource to make that initial investment, because whatever investment is required and the sums required might go down in certain areas. In other areas, to come up with the really big ideas, the investment sums are huge. They can only do the second wave. They are not part. They can't be part of the first wave because they don't have the means to get in there. And there are always exceptions to any of this. There are brilliant small companies who've got the energy to drive a completely new idea that the big companies haven't even thought about, and so on. That's true, but across the board, certainly in the German context, we've got the problem of, are we not leaving many of the smaller companies behind because they can't be in the first wave, and therefore as a government, as a federal institute, how do we support those companies? I think is a big task, and one strategy is via the trainers, the in-company trainers, to use them as multipliers of new ideas, of digital strategies and so on. But certainly in the German context, we are very much at the beginning of this. We haven't got very clearly developed strategies on this.
I mean, I don't think there's a single answer to that, but certainly in the United States, on the manufacturing side, we have what we call manufacturing extension partnership centers. Mm-hmm. So these are centers, and there's at least one in every state, and their goal is to provide essentially consulting services, partly funded by the federal government, partly by fee-based and state-based, to ensure or to provide, to help small and medium manufacturers access new technologies, become more efficient, deal with the related workforce issues. Mm-hmm. So there's a partial federal role in this, but it's also, you know, it's an outreach mechanism to try to deal with that gap that we recognize exists. Because there is, as you mentioned before, I mean, there's a huge diversity in production technologies out there. I'm not saying everybody needs to be digitalized or certainly at the same space, but we want to, you know, at least make smaller companies aware of the possibilities.
Okay.
I would say that among our 15,000 alumni of Skolkovo, we have several dozens of managers who is just hungry for the new technologies implementation to their companies. And none of them are managers of big industries or huge companies. Some of them are small and middle enterprises, founders or managers. The second feeling and the second intentions of such type of people is passion to build the relationships and build the networks. Dive deep into new knowledge, dive deep into new expertise, transfer this expertise all around the companies. The secret of success here is to find these people, join them together during the education programs as well, during the sessions, and give them the opportunities to share this knowledge and this experience. Hunger for the new technologies implementation and effectiveness of new technologies, and hunger for communication, to commute with each other, to talk with each other, and to build new relationship in new sense through this relationship.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I want to do one final round with you, and that's doing the predicting game. So if we met again in 5 years' time here in Berlin, and we would talk about changes in your field of work, what do you think you would tell me? What was the biggest change in the last 5 years that you've experienced in the context you work? Karni, no, you let somebody else. Okay, let's start at this end this time.
I'm not, partly because of my training as an economist, I'm cautious about predictions. But I suspect that whatever my prediction would be, I'd come back 5 years from now and say it was completely wrong. But I mean, the digitalization certainly. I mean, it's not stopping. I don't think it should. I think one thing that's funny is the pendulum swings both ways. I was recently watching a Spanish television thing about occupations, and it pointed out that that even occupations that we consider to be dead can be resurrected, and I think the example of sewing machine operators is an example of that. So I guess I'd be cautious about fixating on what's new and shiny, but look broadly across the economy and think about how tasks and technology, how technologies can alter tasks, and then follow that logical puzzle all the way through.
Okay, good.
A couple of months, I have a friend in St. Petersburg. We are friends from the university, and a couple of months I told him, I bet that in 5 years there will be more electric autonomous car outside the windows of restaurants where we're sitting. So it was a prognosis, it was a prediction, and I tried to win in this prediction. And today I spotted Volkswagen cars from the window of the restaurants, which is electric cars, and there are a lot of them in just a yard of the event of the venue here. And I sent him this photo, and I told him, so just try to be loser in this field. I'm kidding. I mean, lights out factories, definitely they will be everywhere in 5 years. We were last half a year. We were in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, in California factories. We saw a lot of the new technologies inside, which is doing labor force is. I don't want to say is absent in a few 5 years, but definitely in a very transformative way, in a very transformative processes. So it's mostly the transformation to the informational architects, like it was with the CNC machines. Then we've got a lot of operators instead of the machine cutters or real workers. It will be the same with workshops. A lot of the people who is building the intellectual and digital systems, and a lot of people who just observe how it's working and correct it in terms of the possible machine mistakes. Driverless cars, autonomous cars, and lights out factories, the main words for the next 5 years, I suppose.
Well, I'm sure also there will be more autonomous cars, and more professions will need the other skills of software and self-training. I think it'll just increase more and more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much for letting yourself into the prediction game, but more importantly, for giving us the background from your countries, the perspectives from the contexts you work in on a topic that we're all interested in, but we approach probably in different ways, and there are good reasons why that is the case. So thank you for coming here and for the openness to discuss your work, for answering questions, and for letting yourself into a format that might be not that usual. So I certainly enjoyed it. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the event and your trip home when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you.